course I'm gonna disrespect them. I hate the band. They suck. And the fans are gay.
What's up, everybody? I'm Finn McKenty. This is the Punk Rock MBA, and today we're here to talk about some albums that fans and critics absolutely hated, from Green Day, Linkin Park, and Avenged Sevenfold, and most importantly, ask ourselves why. Were these albums really that bad? And most importantly, what can we learn from it? Because I think anytime people feel this strongly about anything, there's almost always something to be learned there from, I guess, a sociology or consumer psychology perspective. And so with that in mind, buckle up and let's get into it. And also, I wanted to mention something new that I'm doing, which is a YouTube coaching program. If you're an individual creator or you're a company, really anybody that wants to grow on YouTube, this is for you. Basically, this is a way to download everything that I have learned about YouTube over the past 7 years from my brain into yours. There's a pretty common set of challenges that pretty much everybody runs into on YouTube. I've run into pretty much all of them. And with this coaching program, I can help you get past those a lot faster than I did figuring it out on my own. For example, in my opinion, the single most important thing for any channel is figuring out the right niche for your content. Like, what should you focus on and how do you talk about it? For example, for me on this channel, once I found that, I went from getting, a couple hundred views a video to tens of thousands of views per video, literally almost overnight. You can see it right here. And also the right approach to things like titles and thumbnails and how to structure your videos to keep people's attention. All that stuff that took me years to figure out on my own through trial and error. I just want to help you speed run all of that. I am super excited about this, and I'm going to be putting a lot of time and energy into it over the course of the year. And if you want to find out more about it, you can just hit the link in the description of this video. First of all, we have Father of All Motherfuckers from Green Day, which came out in 2020. And it might seem weird to have Green Day on this list because they're one of the most respected rock bands of all time, and in my opinion, for good reason. Mostly because their track record is pretty hard to beat. Their second album on Lookout Records, called Kerplunk, is probably the best single snapshot of that late 80s, early 90s East Bay punk sound. And then, of course, there's Dookie, which was their major label debut. But instead of doing something really polished and slick with that major label budget, it basically sounds exactly the same as Kerplunk with that same kind of energy, just with slightly better production. And then about 10 years later, American Idiot revived their career, and in my opinion is one of the absolute all-time great punk albums, right up there with The Clash and the Sex Pistols. I know some people think that's controversial, but I think it's the truth. And there's 21st Century Breakdown, which is kind of the spiritual successor to American Idiot, and these days is one of the fans' favorite albums. And so the point I'm trying to make here is that Green Day's discography over the past 30 years is absolutely stacked, but it does have some rough spots. By the 2010s, it seemed like they'd kind of lost their way with the Uno Dos Tres trilogy in 2012, which was, to put it bluntly, kind of uninspired and really to a lot of people felt more like a collection of unfinished demos that probably should have never been released than a triple album. And they tried to fix that with Revolution Radio in 2016, which wasn't bad, but just felt kind of phoned in. And so a lot of people had just given up on Green Day. But at the same time, a lot of fans still held hope for their next album, which they announced would be Father of All Motherfuckers. And those hopes turned out to be, let's just say, very misplaced. The first sign of trouble for this album was the bizarre billboard that they took out to promote it, which said, "No features, no Swedish songwriters, no trap beats, 100% pure uncut rock," which to me was just really strange energy for Green Day to be putting out. It kind of seemed like this was them taking shots at a lot of things going on in popular music at the time, like the popular Swedish songwriter Max Martin and the popularity of mumble rap, which on its own I think is a little bit of a bad look for an established band like Green Day. But besides that, it was just a couple years too late because both of those things were kind of on their way out by 2020. And so it just felt kind of weirdly out of touch that they did that. And then there's the line 100% pure uncut rock, which just felt really strange coming from Green Day. Seems more like the tagline for some Midwestern radio station that still plays REO Speedwagon and Aerosmith. And then there's the cover art, which is honestly just odd. It's based on the artwork for American Idiot, featuring the arm holding a hand grenade that was on the the cover of that album, but with Father of All Motherfuckers kind of scrawled on the arm in marker, and then there's a cartoon unicorn barfing on the whole thing. And as for the meaning behind this artwork, which kind of had a lot of people scratching their heads, Billy Joe had kind of a non-explanation for it, saying, quote, "I did the artwork and I scribbled Father of All Motherfuckers on the American Idiot album cover." Which, yes, that's what he did, but the question we're wondering is, like, why? Why did you think this was a good idea? What does it mean? It was all just kind of weird. And then there's the music itself. Billy Joe said that they're going for, quote, "an old-timey rock and roll record that traces the history of rock and roll, influenced by classic glam rock bands like T-Rex and Mott the Hoople," which I guess I can hear. And it's not that this album is necessarily bad, it's just that it has a really strange vibe. I actually think this YouTube comment nailed it. The album sounds like the music from a YouTube ad. It was also a little bit odd that after doing that billboard where they talked all this shit about mainstream pop music and seemingly positioning themselves as the band that kind of rejects all of that, shortly after the album came out, they did an official video for Fire, Ready, Aim with the NHL. And there's nothing inherently wrong with hockey or the NHL or anything like that. It just kind of came off as a little strange that after all the sort of energy that they put out with that billboard and everything, that all of a sudden they take this sponsorship with a sports league and come out wearing these glittery suits and glasses. You kind of felt like Green Day had been kidnapped and replaced by robots or something. Like, who are these people? There was also a matter of them in one of the songs using a sample from the convicted sex offender Gary Glitter, which had a lot of people, I think, rightfully upset. Although in their defense, they did donate all their royalties to charity, so at least he wouldn't get any money from the song. Fans hated it, and critics were generally not receptive to the album either. As one reviewer put it, Green Day have become the very thing they once despised. Buck-chasing, mild boys of mayonnaise corporate rock. But at least we still have American Idiot, Dookie, Warning, and Nimrod. For those, we should be thankful. Some fans speculated that the whole album was bad on purpose as this like deliberate fuck you to their label Warner Brothers and to fulfill the last album on their contract before getting rid of the label. But since they subsequently re-signed to Warner Brothers after this album came out, I'm not sure that that theory really holds up. I think it's just a really bad album. And I think the kind of larger lesson to be learned here is that the kind of energy you put out into the world is the kind of energy that you're going to get back. And so in their case, they put out a lot of this really negative, antagonistic energy out there with the billboard and with some of Billy Joe's interviews and public outbursts and some of their press appearances. And so I think that the reaction this album got was largely the world just reflecting that energy back at them.
Let me tell you something. I've been around since fucking 1980 fucking 8. And you're gonna give me 1 fucking minute? You gotta be fucking kidding me!
And next up, we have One More Light by Linkin Park, their final album, which came out in 2017, just 2 months before Chester Bennington's tragic death. Linkin Park broke out back in 2000 with their debut Hybrid Theory, which immediately made them one of the biggest bands in the emerging genre of nu metal, despite the fact that the band themselves wanted nothing to do with the genre. As Mike Shinoda said, "We never held the flag for nu metal. It was associated with frat rock, arrogant, misogynistic, and full of testosterone. We were reacting against that. And although they quickly moved away from the nu metal sound after their second album Meteora, for some reason fans still sort of expected them to go back to that sound, which obviously frustrated the band. As Chester Bennington said, "When we made Hybrid Theory, I was the oldest guy in the band and I was in my early 20s. That's why I guess I'm like, why are we still talking about Hybrid Theory? It's fucking years ago. It's a great record, we love it, but like, move the fuck on." And that sort of describes the dynamic of their whole career, which is Linkin Park trying to do something new and different, and the fans trying to drag them back to the sound they did on their very first album. And so with One More Light being the band's most poppy material yet, fans were not happy. And to give you an idea of what people thought about this album at the time, one reviewer said, quote, "They sound hopelessly lost as they meander through the pop charts. One More Light is a muddled mess of a record from a band that completely abandoned any sense of identity." And personally, I find this kind of reaction in this review to be just honestly incredibly shallow. Yes, obviously this album is not metal, but to characterize this album as being some sort of lightweight, shallow, mainstream pop, I think is completely missing the point and tells me that you honestly didn't even understand it at all. In fact, I would argue that this is some of the most emotionally intense, dark music that I've ever heard in any genre, to the point where it's actually kind of difficult to listen to it. Like listening to this album as I was writing this video, it kind of put me into a little bit of a depressed mood for the rest of the day. That's how powerful this album is. For example, the very first line from the very first song on this album, where Chester tells you exactly where he was at when he was writing it.
I'm dancing with my demons.
And of course, the title track, which on its surface is a sort of friendly, light, upbeat, airy pop song. But if you actually listen, it's one of the most crushingly intense, dark songs that I have ever heard on kind of an emotional level. It's apparently about a friend of theirs who died of cancer, but at the same time, knowing what Chester was struggling with at the time, it's very easy to see him when you read these lyrics.
Can I help you not to hurt?
And Chester sadly took his own life shortly after the album came out. And then you saw that suddenly a lot of people kind of changed their attitude about the album. And all of a sudden they started hailing it as this like classic masterpiece, which for the record, I think it is that. It's just very, very different from what a lot of those same people were saying a few months earlier, which kind of reminded me of the discussion around Michael Jackson. If you remember back when he was alive, he was largely treated as this sort of insane freak. For example, I remember the press referring to him as Wacko Jacko for doing things like sleeping in an oxygen tent and having a pet monkey, which kind of makes me think of the larger topic of how we treat celebrities and public figures in general, and just how toxic and unhealthy that is. And of course, to some extent, they do sign up for that by being public figures, but knowing what Chester was going through and why he was going through that, because he had suffered through years and years of sexual abuse as a child, when you have that in mind, it's really hard to go through and read all these nasty comments that people made about the album at the time. And you just think, like, why does it take somebody's death in order for us to finally start treating them like a decent person? As another example of that, look at how cruel a lot of people were to the 2000s child stars like Corey Feldman, who for years was treated as a laughingstock and everyone acted like he was crazy for telling what ended up being actually something pretty close to the truth about Hollywood.
You're damaging an entire industry.
I'm sorry, I'm not trying to. I'm just trying to say that it's a very important, serious topic.
People laughed at him for years, but then when the stuff about Epstein came out, we thought, oh, maybe Corey Feldman wasn't crazy at all. Maybe we should have listened to him. Or Amanda Bynes, who everybody laughed at when she was having a public meltdown on Twitter and eventually in real life. But then she eventually shared that she had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder and was struggling with addiction as well. And again, suddenly the same people that laughed at her decided that now they felt sorry for her. And so I guess the takeaway for me in this case is that if you don't like this album, that's totally okay. You don't have to like One More Light or anything else. But I do wish that fans could be a little bit less negative and toxic when they talk about this stuff. And remember that public figures are human beings too. And also, I think it's a little bit disappointing that there's a certain segment of rock fans where it seems like the only thing they can appreciate is music that's heavy, sort of in the sense of being more metal oriented. Like if it doesn't have big guitars and metal riffs, it's trash to them. And again, on the one hand, obviously you're not obligated to like anything, and if you don't like it, you don't like it. But I think that's just kind of an unfortunate way to think, because it means you're closing yourself off to a lot of great music that just isn't metal. For example, One More Light, which I personally think has the strongest songwriting and emotional depth of any Linkin Park album.
Who cares when someone's time runs out if the moment is all we are?
And the last album we'll be looking at in this video is Hail to the King by Avenged Sevenfold from 2013. And I think this is a fascinating example of how fan expectations are this kind of constantly moving target. And to explain what I mean by that, let me back up and talk about their history. Avenged Sevenfold first hit the larger metal world consciousness in 2005 with their third album, City of Evil, and in particular, the lead single, Bat Country. And surprisingly, this song became a hit on MTV's countdown show TRL, which was pretty much the center of teen culture at the time, despite the fact that the song is 5 minutes long and has a guitar solo that's nearly an entire 60 seconds. Not exactly what you thought would be at the top of the charts, and yet there it was. And to me, this is what metal fans said they always wanted. A guitar-driven metal band that could play their asses off and get the genre back into the mainstream again. But because Avenged Sevenfold were kind of from the Warped Tour world, they wore eyeliner and they had swoopy hair and all that kind of look, because of that, metal fans hated them and called them emo posers. And that is how things stood for another 8 years until the release of Hail to the King, which was kind of their homage to classic metal. A much more stripped down, focused album than anything they'd done before. And in a lot of ways, this is exactly what the metal fans had been telling them to do for so long. Drop all that Warped Tour metalcore crap and just make a real metal album, right? And yet when they did that, when they did the thing that the metal fans were asking for, well, they still got backlash. Fans said that it was generic and it was too derivative of all the bands that came before them, with the most common criticism being that it was a ripoff of Metallica's Black Album, which of course the band acknowledged was a huge influence of theirs, and I don't really see how that's a bad thing. I mean, doesn't everyone love the Black Album? But again, Avenged Sevenfold were held to a different standard because of all this kind of embedded hatred that people had for them based on what they were doing back in 2005. The ultimate example of that being when Rob Flynn from Machine Head made a Facebook post calling it a covers album, saying that, quote, "Who knew that re-recording Metallica, Guns N' Roses, and Megadeth songs could be such a worldwide hit?" And then going on to say stuff like, quote, "Eyeliner sales skyrocket as thousands of heartbroken goth girls realize Hail to the King is actually that ugly AC/DC band song Thunderstruck." And after getting called out on it, Rob tried to say that those were jokes, which I personally am not so sure that they were. But either way, what he said was pretty representative of how the metal scene in general seemed to feel about Hail to the King. Although it's worth noting that for as much as the metal scene shit on it, it was very popular with the kind of people who don't leave comments on Lambgoat, going to #1 on Billboard and getting certified as platinum shortly thereafterwards, so obviously not everybody hated it. And it was also responsible for getting a whole new generation of people into Avenged Sevenfold. People from a kind of new demographic. I think mostly older fans from sort of the hard rock kind of genre, kind of people that might go see Black Label Society or something, who might have missed out on them during their TRL years, but were now discovering Avenged Sevenfold through rock radio.
They're always commenting on my fucking video that I put up a while back, and they fucking pissed me off so much. The Rev was an amazing player. He was fucking awesome. How dare you disrespect him? He's dead. And it's like, of course I'm gonna disrespect him. I hate the fucking band. They fucking suck. And the fans are fucking gay.
And the question is, what can we learn from this one? And I think the lesson here is that people listen to music with their eyes as much as they do with their ears. And what I mean by that is because Avenged Sevenfold originally came from that Warped Tour metalcore kind of scene and looked like more of a quote-unquote emo band, a lot of metal fans and other artists had already decided that this band was the enemy. And so when Hail to the King came out, before these people ever even heard a note of the music on the album, they had already decided that they were never going to like it. Their minds were already made up, which in my opinion is really unfortunate, because isn't that kind of attitude the exact opposite of what the alternative music scene was supposed to be about? Wasn't this supposed to be the place where the weird kids could go and just be themselves, where they wouldn't have to worry about getting bullied because of their haircut or how they dress? That's what I thought, but I'm asking all those questions rhetorically because obviously we all know the answer. Unfortunately, the metal scene is just as cliquey and conformist as the worst high school lunchroom, and the reaction to this album is the perfect example of that. Like, pretend that Hail to the King was released by a different band. Maybe one that dressed like a Metallica promo photo from 1984. Do you think Rob Flynn and all those same fans would have been so aggressively critical of this album? I would say probably not. And again, the sad part is that these people are really only holding themselves back by being like this. Like, how many great bands did they close themselves off to by judging the band based on how they dress, their haircuts, or because they're not from the right scene, or any of those other kind of superficial things? I don't don't know, but at the end of the day, it's their loss. All right, my friends, that does it for this video. As always, let me know what you think in the comments, and I would like to thank everyone who supports me on Patreon, especially those of you who support at the True Cult level or above. Patrons get access to my podcasts and videos early. There are members-only channels on my Discord that I'm super active in. I do Q&As, I do giveaways, and there's a way to have me review your music live on Twitch. So if any of that sounds cool, hit the link in the description of this video. And with that, I'm going to sign off for now, but I will see you next time.